Welcome back for another episode of Drilling Deeper, a Pit and Quarry podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Kevin Yannick. We're going to be talking about Sunrock today as they're celebrating their 75th anniversary here in 2024. Once again with us, we've got Pit and Quarry Managing Editor Jack Kapansky. Jack, happy holidays.
Happy holidays, Kevin. Thrilled to be here.
Well, before we dive into Sunrock a little bit, as you know, we've gotten to know them a little bit over the last couple of years, let's give a shout out to our episode sponsor.
You know I love shouting out the sponsors, Kevin. Thank you to the sponsor of this episode, Geologic. Geologic uses scientific investigation and engineering design backed by their AASHTO accredited laboratory to provide innovative solutions to their most challenging mining and development issues in a safe, effective, and cost-efficient manner. When it needs to be done right the first time, call Geologic at 770-824-4212. Thank you to Geologic. Kevin, what do you think? I got a future in ad reading and voiceover work, maybe?
I think there might be something there, Jack.
All right, I'm just going to start saving these clips. You know, if all of a sudden I don't show up to work one day, just listen to the radio a little bit. You might hear me.
Yeah. One of those little funny radio jingles that'll be you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Cool.
Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about Sunrock and actually visiting with Sunrock leaders today. You know, they're a North Carolina-based producer. We've gotten to know them a little bit over the last couple of years. I was actually down in North Carolina, I guess it was in summer of 2023, and got to meet Mr. Bryan Pfohl and some of his team. And as we were doing, some trips through North Carolina and West Virginia a year ago, and just kind of interesting having the opportunity to listen to him, the knowledge that he has about the industry. You know, Mr. Pfohl's been in this industry his entire adult life. His career extends beyond 60 years, I believe, at Sunrock, and he was one of two guests that we have on today's show, Jack, Mr. Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite. Mr. Pfohl is the chairman of Sunrock Group Holdings Corp. and Sunrock Canada, and he represents the second generation of his family business. You know, there's third generation that's involved. And again, they're celebrating their 75th anniversary today, and it's always special. You know, we talked in the past, Jack, about some of the milestones that producing companies in our industry have achieved. You know, Peckham Industries. You know, we highlighted one of their anniversaries earlier this year, and last year was a big year for Lux Stone, which is the biggest family-owned company in the aggregates industry, in the crushed stone industry. And today, again, we're going to highlight Sunrock's history because again, it kind of is indicative of a lot of producing companies out there in the industry, this idea of, pursuing the American dream, building something small, starting out small, and ultimately building something that's, kind of unbelievable in size and scope. And that's, really the Sunrock story. They have an interesting story too, Jack, because they essentially originated in New York State, with some roots in the Buffalo market. And, Mr. Pfohl identified 40 years ago, essentially, or a little bit before that, because they made the move to North Carolina 40 years ago. They made this decision to basically kind of switch markets. Find a better opportunity, a better market opportunity for the company, so that it could grow and prosper. And they kind of identified the Raleigh, North Carolina market as the next up and coming thing. And lo and behold, here in 2024, that's one of the better performing markets in all of America. And we've seen kind of what's transpired in the state of New York. So we talk about vertical integration. That whole concept, that's something that probably wasn't around as much as it was 40 years ago as it was today. But a lot of different layers that we heard from Mr. Pfohl, and you're going to hear from Mr. Pfohl during today's interview. And again, we had with us Zach Satterwhite. He's the COO of Sunrock. Zach attended our Pit and Quarry Roundtable in 2023, and he actually began his career with Carolina Sunrock 18 years ago. He's responsible for the day-to-day management of the company's operations there. And I thought it was interesting to hear from Mr. Pfohl, one, because it's his family company, and obviously he's central to some of the decision making. But you've got somebody who came along and has basically found a home there, and he's got this other perspective, this other view, about the growth and what it's like to work with a company that's now on to 75 years and looking to a third generation and hopefully going on to 80 years, 100 years. Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking over a little bit of Sunrock's history and reading the story you put together from your conversation with Mr. Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite. Just a fascinating story. I think it was interesting starting off in raising hogs in New York to all of a sudden becoming this 75-year staple in the aggregate industry is just such a fascinating turn. And, we've heard similar stories of people starting in one, sort of in one medium, if you will, and then transitioning to aggregate. So, I think this is the first hog farmer we've written about, so that's definitely very cool. And in looking through it, just a very cool transition of things, starting in New York, ultimately getting into like you mentioned, the Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina area, in 1980, being there for 44 years now, pretty impressive there. Last 5 years, they've also been up in Canada, which anytime you can expand sort of quote unquote internationally is obviously exciting. And you mentioned in your story that they sold off their New York operations in 2002. It's still 53 years in New York, so that's incredibly impressive. Not only to make it 75 years, but to be operating that long in one place is obviously very exciting. And I think you talk about the way North Carolina is now a substantial market for aggregates, and it was mentioned in the story here that Mr. Pfohl mentioned that when they got there were about 5.5 million people in North Carolina. There's over 12 million in the area, in that Raleigh-Durham area now. So just obviously very exciting. And you mentioned Luck Stone, and we've talked about their success. We talked about their 100th anniversary earlier this year, and it just goes back to the point I believe I made then, that you don't get to a milestone like this by accident. You need to be doing the right things. You need to be treating people right, and you need to be doing business the right way. And obviously, the Pfohls are doing that. And it's sort of weird to wrap your mind around. 75 years, only 2 generations. 31 years for his father, 44 years for Mr. Pfohl now was just astounding. So here's to 75 more, gentlemen. We've got a great conversation to hear with Mr. Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite. So I won't talk anymore.
Well, let's hear from Mr. Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite.
What has Sunrock been doing in 2024 to celebrate its 75? And based on kind of what I've gathered and what Alex has shared, it seems like you guys make a point every 5 years or so to stop what you're doing, to pause just for a moment and celebrate the successes you've had. It seems like every 5 or 10 years, Sunrock's making a move, doing something different. The business model's evolving a little bit. So this particular 75th, and then just the idea too of stopping to celebrate your successes from time to time. That seems like something you guys value.
Well, as far as our 75th is concerned, actually a week from Saturday, we're going to have a large celebration for all the employees, and some recognition for special recognition for some of our 25-year employees, of which there's quite a number. And they'll all receive a special watch with their name in it. For the 25-year people. We do have recognition for times less than that, but 25 years seems to be very special. We've had a number of people retire from the Carolina business here that have had over 30 years service. So, which is, this is our 75th year as a company. However, that's also our 40th year in North Carolina. So it really, sometimes you kind of forget about that. Because it's time just marches on and on and on. But the 40 years in North Carolina is a special thing, because we made a large decision to go elsewhere, try something different, and it worked. And so we're pretty proud of that success. And of course, the business is very different marketplace, different customer base. The whole thing is different. In which actually our company now is much more vertically integrated than it was in Buffalo when it started. All the way down through the construction companies. So that we operate. And so it's here in North Carolina. North Carolina's been a very very good state for us. A very wonderful place to live and do business. And I was just telling Hunter here that when we came here, there was about 5 or 5.5 million people here. Now there's over 12 million, I believe. Well, that's 2.5 times the amount of people. And so things have changed. The culture's changed. Obviously, we get more focus from the outside. A lot of businesses want to locate here to take advantage of our university system that the state offers. But it's also important to note that the Raleigh area is the only place in the country where there are 3 Tier 1 universities in the same place. So that it becomes a very fertile, what you would call it, breeding ground for knowledge and diversity. So consequently, we have the diversity, and the diversity in our economy here has changed here from total agriculture, furniture, textiles, and so forth since the time I've been here. You know, there's no more tobacco industry to speak of, and to one of manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, high tech innovations. I always want to say to everybody that you know, that LED light bulb that you have in your house and your car was a local business, startup business from Durham, North Carolina, called Crete, and they invented that LED light bulb, and it's everywhere. So there's a lot of different types of things that have come forth here because of the climate that's very conducive towards innovation and business startups. And,
Mr. Pfohl, would you say the decision to move to North Carolina was maybe the most critical one to the success of Sunrock over, you know, its 75 years? Obviously, there were a lot of decisions, like the vertical integration decision, the decision to go to Canada, and there's a lot that's transpired in your tenure there that's kind of led to the formation of Sunrock as it is today. But going to North Carolina, I mean, is that the biggest inflection point in terms of how the company could have gone or how it has gone?
well, the business was very successful that my family started after the war in Buffalo. However, as time progressed, it was becoming increasingly obvious that the economic opportunity in that area was getting more and more limited, and we needed to look somewhere else. So, and we did that, and we, you know, commenced the search, and we looked at numbers of the states, but we obviously settled here in North Carolina. And consequently, we thought it would offer us the best opportunity. But at that time, as I said, there were 5.5 million people. Well, the market was much more limited, and consequently, as the economy changed here and the industrial base changed, and so on and so forth, it allowed us to really grow at a much more exponential rate than we could have in many other places. And consequently, yes, it made a difference, but and we ran both businesses in New York concurrently. I mean, I commuted for 18 years, so before we sold the Buffalo company. But here I am, right again. I'm back up in Toronto, right across the river from where we grew up. So
Full circle in a way.
yeah, it is full circle, and it's sort of the same type of thing, Kevin, because you know, Toronto is the second largest city in North America. A lot of Americans really don't know that. In the end, I mean, there's however you want to look at it, with the GTA, there could be 8 to 10 million people there right now, and the diversity there and industrial base and so forth. It's a different country. The taxes are different. How you do business is different. The materials are different, but they still use rock and sand and concrete and asphalt, and that's what we do. So, and their immigration policy there continues to bring in an enormous amount of people from all over legally, and consequently, Canada gets about 500,000 people a year legally, and about 2/3 of them end up in Southern Ontario. So it creates a major demand on an annual basis for everything that we do. So and we're very optimistic about the future. We have a nice position up there, but it's a beginning business, a startup to some degree, and it's gonna get bigger as time goes on, like any of these businesses do. But the demands there, what we need to have a business, continues to exist in a place like that, like it did in Raleigh, except that it's just a whole lot faster up there than it was here.
I remember when I visited with you last year, I think you said one of the source points, source of information you used to kind of determine North Carolina, and I don't know if that was a factor in Canada, was to use the Rand McNally guide or some sort of book, essentially, to determine where the next
I
next
didn't
happening places in America.
it was called. He was at the public library back then. I don't know if they still make it, Kevin, but it was Rand McNally. It was called Places Rated, and it was a very large, coffee table book, if you will, and it had all the demographics for all the different metropolitan areas in the U.S. And it would, so you'd go state by state, and it would show how much people spend on groceries, how much they spend on furniture, all that type of stuff. Value of the houses, income, so on and so forth. And you could start to see that, for at that time, Raleigh, even being only about the third the size of Charlotte, had a significant more disposable income than Charlotte did. And so when you start to look at where that came from and what's driving it, it encouraged. We had a spot near Charlotte, and the end of the day is, where did you want to live? Well, we kind of like being in the state capital, and they always spend money at the state capital. So the end of the day ends up being, that was our problem in Buffalo. Buffalo was 285 miles from Albany. By the time they got to Rochester, they were out of money. So from a public works point of view, but reality is that we use that guide as an indicator whether we were going in the right place or not. And if you can see some growth and you see how people spend money, it's going to tell you where they're going to want infrastructure. They're going to want the things that our industry provides. So, and the growth was there. And of course, RTP was there at that time. That's when RTP was really sort of kicking off earlier, a few years before we got here.
So that Places Rated, as you called it, that was a good starting point, a good source. Did you still have to kind of have the vision to see where it's going to go yourself, I guess? And you just kind of rattled off half a dozen different industries that have kind of evolved or taken off in the last 20, 30 plus years in Raleigh. And tobacco, obviously, probably when you guys were in your infancy down there, that was probably still vibrant. Did you envision it taking off? Aside from what that source guide was telling you, did you see all this coming together, or was some of it luck?
About the same time we came here, IBM closed their Kingston, New York operation, and they moved the entire operation. I think it was 5,000 or 6,000 people here. And then GlaxoSmithKline, was inventing the AZT for the AIDS treatment at that time over here at the park. So there was a number of things that were going on here also that showed long-term resiliency. And that's one of the things. Manufacturing can be very cyclical, but a lot of these other kinds of industries, the information data processing, so on and so forth, those things are pretty resilient to downturns, because it's kind of like the bank. It's going to be open whether we have a good economy or not. It's going to be there every day. So we kind of look for that, and that's kind of where it goes back to the I like the demographics. When you see demographics, there's a lot to be learned from that from an economic point of view.
What do you think your predecessors, in the family business saw? I mean, obviously they identified an opportunity post World War II to take off, seeing that the country needed to be built. It was growing, infrastructure was coming along. I guess knowing the history and the infancy of the business, I guess what were they trying to pursue? What were they trying to achieve? And we had talked offline a little bit about this whole idea of the American dream. I mean, the Sunrock story, your family story is it kind of embodies this whole idea of the American dream. Building something, having a dream, seeing it come to life. Do you feel that's the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, they all grew up on a farm outside of Buffalo, near the Buffalo airport. It was a hog farm, and that's what they did. And then when the war came, two of the three brothers went in the service. My dad was not eligible for some other deferment, but at the end of the day, ends up being, when they all came back, they needed something to do, and Buffalo was exploding. And the housing business, after the war, everything changed, and everything was, the development in Buffalo was astronomical in Western New York. Plus, it had an enormous amount of heavy industry. We had one steel plant; they had 20,000 people working on it. So, with 3 steel mills there, plus the oil refineries and the grain processing and so on and so forth. So after the war, matter of fact, a lot of them, which a lot of folks don't know, that there were a lot of the Curtiss Wright built a lot of the fighter planes right near the Buffalo airport. It had a huge factory that made fighting planes and so forth. Helicopters were invented in Niagara Falls. Bell Helicopter, the first helicopters. So, and that was a local business. So there's a lot of change up there at that time. So they created the demand, and the guys, I guess they decided that instead of raising hogs, they'd try something different. So that's kind of really how it started. They started off as contractors and needed materials, and they found a source of materials and gave up the contracting and concentrated on a materials business, sand and gravel.
And you mentioned the word change a few times. If you're going to survive in this industry, this business, or I suppose any line of work, you've got to be willing to change. And, I mentioned some of those inflection points, Canada, North Carolina, moving out of New York, vertically integrating. I mean, I'm sure there's drivers behind all that that forced change, that you guys said it's time to change. Otherwise, something bad or something negative could potentially happen to the business. So just the idea of change. How do you guys approach that? How does Sunrock approach that? Do you look at it as a good thing, a bad thing, both?
No, the only thing you can depend upon is change. I mean, it's going to happen. So, it's kind of an interesting thing. If you look at our business and the business you cover all the time, our product is natural resource products, but the demand for them is increased because of the population. Because we can't have a vibrant society without the stuff. And when you get, whether it ends up in construction uses or industrial minerals or agricultural purposes, everything that's ever been made or used has got to come out of the ground. And I don't think we do a very good job of teaching the future generations that that's exactly where they're. I can't tell you, Kevin. I've said to so many people, do you know what's in your toothpaste? And they look at me.
Minerals.
It's limestone. It's what does all the work. Limestone or dolomite, ground limestone, and you get some flavoring in the tube, but basically that's what it is. So without that, you look at so many things that we do that are so our transportation system would stop without what we do. And it's amazing, and how many people will take a handful of crushed stone or something. They'll see someone along the side of the road and have no idea where it comes from, why it's there, what it does, and the house they live in, the road they drive on, the place they work would cease to exist without what we do. And so does it change? Yeah, I think we've changed a lot of the ways we produce the material. I think and how we use the material, but it's still the basic material. And it's and again, it's something that has to be consumed locally, if you will. You can't put it on a boat and bring it from somewhere else very well because it's so expensive to transport.
Yeah, that's the name of the game, right? The transportation, those costs, the freight.
It kind of goes with the old real estate connotation: location, location, location. It's what it is.
Right.
What I try to do, people ask me, what do we really do here? And I used to try to explain to them how the process worked and all the rest of it. And I finally gave up. And what I basically say these days is I say, we just break this stuff up and crush it. We glue it back together and you get your choice of black or white. Yeah, that they get. So and that's important because that's exactly it's blacktop or concrete. Take your pick.
We're in the glue business.
Yeah, we're kind of in the gluing business. That's as Hunter reminds me here.
Well, that simplifies it for everybody, right?
Well, and if you don't, this. You're a communicator. I mean, the issue ends up being, how do you get people to understand and be aware of what you're trying to say?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, you're hitting on something that's still pertinent today. I mean, kids, where does their food come from? I mean, they think it just comes from the grocery store or McDonald's has it on hand, it just magically appears. I don't know what they think, but yeah, I mean, the same thing applies in our industry. I think you hit something too that kind of resonated with me, and it's true. I mean, it's not a surprise or anything, but just the critical nature of this industry. We value as a country the way of life that we have, and so maybe 90% of the public, maybe it's less, like maybe they're ignorant to that, but at the end of the day, I mean, we've survived, grown as a country over your 75 years, and if we want to keep doing that, we're going to need to rely on the Sunrocks and other producers across the country to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, Kevin, I think it's a really big impact from the industry to get a more positive light around what we do. You hear quarry, you hear asphalt plant, you hear concrete plant, people think about air and dust and their drinking water and all the things that are just false narratives around the industry as they drive on the roads that we build to work and work in nice Class A office spaces that took concrete and asphalt parking lots. So, I mean, as an industry, I think it's our job to carry on the positive message that the industry actually portrays and creates versus the negative connotation that surrounds it from time to time. It's an important message for us to continue to get out as an industry, not just Sunrock.
Yeah, and that's important what Zach's saying. For example, if you look in Florida and along the coast, more and more of the housing is built out of concrete block, tile roofs, or whatever you wish to call it. And at the end of the day, where you can't put a stick-built house because when the hurricane comes in, it'll be gone. So when you get through with it, without rock and sand and cement and all the rest of it, you wouldn't be able to have that, and the insurance would be prohibitive. So every time you see these hurricanes, we all see what the enormous damage can cause. So how do you mitigate that? You build it better, and when you build it better, you got to. And it kind of always reminds me of something I thought of, over the years watching the evening news, and you'd see some, like for example during the war in the Balkans, and you'd see these houses over there in Serbia and Croatia and all the rest of it. And they'd be shooting at the house, and they'd blow the back end of the house and all end off, and they'd just close the door and live in the rest of the house because the house was built out of stone.
Yeah.
So it tells you that there's ways of doing things that last, and there's ways of doing things that are inexpensive, but they're very, very, very temporary.
What would you guys say the biggest threat to the business or the biggest threat to the construction materials industry is today? Because we just talked about how our products make life as it is. We like life as it is. Are there threats that could change that? I suppose. Maybe I'm thinking legislatively or regulatorily. I guess in your day-to-day lives as you're going about work at Sunrock, what potentially is detrimental to the business the most?
I think probably, in my view, uninformed, overzealous regulation.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, that's been adopted to respond to certain groups that really don't understand what it takes to have an economy and to have an infrastructure that exists. Because what you get is things that are impossible. I mean, we see this with this electric car thing now, So we're talking to our truck provider, over-the-road truck provider, and they're all concerned about how industry is going to be able to meet all these regulations in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years.
Mhm.
And there's some of this stuff going on in New York and New Jersey, I guess, presently. But so if you mandated an electric truck, at least the kind of truck to do the work that we're doing right now, I was told that you're talking about a truck that's going to, for example, a regular concrete mixer, if it was all electric, because of the nature of the battery, it's going to carry about 1/3 of the load that we carry now. So now we're talking about a threefold increase in traffic and wear and tear on the system. And you know, we've seen this already with like the F-100 or F-150. You know, matter of fact, I'm not sure if they stopped making them. I mean, they stopped. They know they cut the production way down. Nobody's buying them.
Electric truck, you mean?
Yeah.
Electric version? Yeah.
Now, am I against electric? No. We've seen it being used in the quarry on some wheel loaders and hybrid type stuff. And some of the stuff is very effective. But you can't just legislate something without understanding the ramifications of how to implement it.
That's right.
Which goes back to like we had after the Depression, where they decided to have prohibition. We're not going to sell any alcohol anymore, and then all that did is put a whole other gang of people in business doing things that weren't so good. And then that lasted 10 years or whatever it was, and they repealed it. But eventually, sometimes the cure can be worse than a disease until you understand how to treat the disease. And I see that happening with a lot of things. I've been around a while, so I mean, I've seen some of these cycles come and go.
The Sunrock, do you think other producers too, you see regulations put forward that have been just totally unmanageable? You know, I think you're hitting on one that's interesting, and we're already seeing some equipment manufacturers try to get in front of that as much as they can. But I don't know that, you know, the end users, you know, Sunrock in this case, everybody's fully educated about what's gonna take to implement that. And you're talking about 1/3 the payload. I mean, that's a problem. There's probably 100 other problems that, you know, maybe haven't been addressed. But so just the idea that if you experience in your time, maybe more recently, I would imagine, you know, regulation come forward that is just not tenable, and then how do you work around that?
Well, and I think what happens to our industry in particular with that is because we're such a small number. The regulations we end up with are different than what everybody else has under OSHA.
Mm.
And we're seeing that with the silica rules and things that are out here now. And so there's really not much of an opportunity for us to be able to, I guess, defend ourselves, so to speak. It'll be kind of interesting to see what happens now that the Supreme Court has passed that Chevron case, which is going to really reel in some of the regulators, because the issue, I don't know if you've kept up with that, Kevin, but the nature of it is that the agencies have far outstripped the intent of the law.
Too much regulation.
Yeah, and just briefly on this case, so apparently there's a bunch of fishing operations that were regulated by a government agency, and the government agencies, they're herring fishermen. And that's what the Chevron case is about. And apparently the government said that they had to have inspectors on the fishing boats. So the government put inspectors on the fishing boats. Then later on, the government decided now the fishing boats have to pay for the inspectors. And that's the Chevron case. That's what tipped the scales. They said they went too far. That was not the intent of the regulations of the law when the law was passed. And I think when you have a continuous situation where we have regulations that are made by agencies, not by the legislature, because they're making law on their own. And that's not what the system is supposed to work like. Anyway, I would look forward to seeing some of these based on the Chevron case that probably a number of suits in the next few years that are going to start reeling in some of this stuff. Where we had water, we had ditches considered to be waterways of the United States. You know, I mean, some of the stuff has gotten to the point where it's become more of a vehicle for certain groups to get what they want as opposed to what's good for the whole, everybody as a whole.
Right. All that said, so I asked the question leading into that. You know, what worries you? What threats are there to aggregate producing businesses, to construction materials firms today? I mean, I'm guessing you guys are still very optimistic about where things are and where things are going to go. 75 years, the vibrancy. There's probably many more years to come. Plus, producers, by their nature, they're resilient. I mean, a regulation comes at you, you find a way, you adapt. You just keep plowing through. You know, no matter what the obstacle is. It seems that's just what's in the fabric of producing companies. But maybe to kind of put a full circle question to it, I'm guessing you're optimistic. I mean, maybe you can share your optimism for the future as you guys are celebrating 75 years at Sunrock this year.
Well, yeah, we are. I think one of the things that we've done as a company is adapted to the future, where some of the smaller producers didn't. It takes a lot of diversity in skill sets now to run these businesses, and unless the business is of a certain size, it's not able to support that level of expertise of people that you have to have. So it does put you in a position that you need to grow to some degree, which we've done. But from the future point of view, it's going to be however many people they're all going to consume so much materials. It's just a fact. And the end of the day ends up being we have the reserves and plenty of that we've been I could say forward looking enough to acquire enough of this stuff. So we're in a position that we're here for a long run. So and again, some people want to exit the business, other people want to get in the business, but it takes an awful lot of money to get into this business and be able to be successful at it. Much more than it did when my family started.
Yeah. Zach, how about from your view? I mean, you maybe remind me how many years you've been at Sunrock now, but what's your optimism for the future?
18 years. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I would say if you ask me about Sunrock and Mr. Pfohl specifically is vision. You know, we all look at running the business day to day and how do we do today and what's tomorrow look like, and he's always looked at a 10 to 15 to 25 plus year plan, right? So when you are in the quarry business, obviously you're not looking at what's it going to do tomorrow. You're looking at what is the life of the quarry going to do and what ability does that quarry have to service the market. So being vertically integrated, it gives us the opportunity to service the market and you know, whether it's ready mix, asphalt, or aggregate, or all three. So the company is positioned well in a growing market, a growing economy to be able to serve the market and our customer base and continue to grow that customer base with our locations and continuing to look for locations that we feel like growth is going to go to. So that's the exciting part of being here is it's not 50 years from now, we still have reserves. 100 years from now, we still have reserves. So the business is positioned to accommodate the market, grow with the market, and be a leading aggregate and material supplier in the market. So as a 18-year team member here, that's exciting for me. It's exciting for the young people that we have here and the people that really see an overall vision of not just what's tomorrow look like, what does 25 years from now look like, which is it's hard to get people to buy into that. And the company's done a great job. As Mr. Pfohl said, we've got two handfuls of people that are going to celebrate 25 years with us this year. We've got some 30-plus year employees that have retired, so they've obviously seen, a bigger picture than just tomorrow. So that's a neat part of the business.
Zach, you touched on vertical integration. I think Mr. Pfohl did as well, but I just wanted to ask about that because that's not something that's been around 75 years. I mean, probably 75 years ago, you had, the family-owned sand and gravel producing company, and that's what they did. And today we see the nature of companies is they've got a lot more arms and legs to them, I suppose. And Sunrock has a contracting services division, so Maybe Sunrock, you could walk me through some of the decision making to kind of go that route and to build in that mold. And is success today, success in 2024, is it critical to be a vertically integrated company, or is it possible for the mom and pop sand and gravel producer to survive now and in the years to come?
I think every how can I say that? Throughout the country, every market's different. The needs are different, the specs are different, whatever resources are available in the ground are different. But for us, the vertical integration became really part of what we had to do to exist in Buffalo. Upstate New York is very unique as far as the rest of the country is concerned. So other than the sand and gravel business, which they had for about 10 years, they exited that and went in the quarry business. In the quarry business, upstate New York, you were in the asphalt business at the same time. So all the paving, there were no paving contractors that had asphalt plants. The quarries had them. So we always were focused on the downstream products. That's what I grew up with. And when I was 20 or 21 years old, I had 3 asphalt plants to take care of. So the reality of it is that the quarry always provided materials for the downstream business. So that's kind of how we evolved in upstate New York. In upstate New York, now there's parts of Pennsylvania, northern Pennsylvania are like that too, but we were very unique as compared to the rest of the country. We're the paving contractor laid it down and made the materials and bought it from a quarry or whatever. We always had that situation where you had to make the rocks right so you could make the blacktop right. And that put a series of disciplines in our thinking and the way we did business, because it wasn't just about having one thing to sell somebody else to make something. We made the finished product. And that's a lot different than just making some of the raw materials. And consequently, that's what, we cut our teeth on up there. And I think it was maybe it was an act of God that we were in the right place. But the fact of the matter is that's kind of, there was no other way of doing it. Nobody had an asphalt plant that wasn't an aggregate man.
Yeah, you're not going to compete with another model.
No, well, but on the other hand, you might have a quarry, which we did, a number of them, and actually in 2 cases, we had a quarry, and next door was another quarry, and we each all had asphalt plants. So we competed for the same customers. so and they were the paving contractors. So and if you didn't do it right, the guy went next door and bought it over there. So it was more about making the materials right for the downstream businesses, and that's kind of how we cut our teeth. We never were in the ready mix business till we came here, and the reason for that was the mix of aggregates that are used in where we were in Buffalo. They build a different kind of pavement that use all the different sizes. Down here, it doesn't work that way. The 3/4 inch stone needs to go somewhere, and concrete's where it goes. So that's how we ended up in the concrete business.
Yeah, for me, Kevin, I think the vertical integration gives us versatility and diversity from a customer base. We don't just have one single customer base. We're able to go into commercial, residential, DOT, municipality, right? It gives us the ability to adapt to the market. If the market's heavy residential, we can do that. If it's heavy commercial, we can do that. We can do a blend. And that vertical integration just helps with the versatility from a company standpoint.
Well, that was Bryan Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite of Sunrock. Thank you both for getting together. It was a pleasure visiting with you, just like it was a pleasure visiting with Mr. Pfohl in 2023. Jack, I think I had talked to you, offline about when I met Mr. Pfohl, and it was during an encounter with Steve Zelnick, who was the former head of Martin Marietta, and I don't think I fully understood, their careers and, the longevity and the history. Obviously, I knew that, they've done a lot of great things, as business people and within their communities, but it was just interesting sitting in a room with Mr. Pfohl and Mr. Zelnick, and you just had everybody kind of the eyes and ears were just applied to these two gentlemen. Wealth of knowledge, so much history and passion for what they do. And, again, it was a pleasure, having another opportunity to visit with Mr. Pfohl, to visit with Zach Satterwhite, and congratulations to them on their 75th anniversary. That's a heck of a milestone. And, I know they're putting, a lot of credit on their people, on employees, and, recognizing some of their individual milestones. And we hear time and time again, Jack, whether it's Sunrock or another company in the industry, our companies, our industries, it's all about the people, and Sunrock, really recognize that, and congrats to the people who've really helped sustain and grow Sunrock to a 75-year point in its tenure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously look no further than Zach. I mean, he's been there 18 years. He sort of talked about what a great experience it's been for him. And not only has he been there 18 years, he's talking about what the next 25 years have in plan. So it certainly sounds like he's in no hurry to get out. And again, the way you keep people in one place that long, like you said, you treat them right, you treat them fairly, you do your job well, you let them do their job well. And I think just to go back to when you were talking about your visit with Mr. Pfohl and Steve Zelnick back last year, you talk about the way that sort of everyone in the room, their attention was there. And just like you don't make it to 75, 100 years by accident, you don't garner that respect by accident. You got to earn that level of respect to where people are, when you speak, they listen. And this is obviously clear in the couple of conversations you've had with him. I haven't had the fortune to meet him yet, but in a couple of conversations you've had with him, it is evident that he has earned every shred of respect that he gets. And, yeah, congratulations on 75 years, Mr. Pfohl. Very exciting, and here's to another 75 plus.
Yeah, and I really love their story. I mean, as I was thinking about the things I wanted to touch on coming out of that interview with Mr. Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite, there was a lot, but there were a couple of things that kind of resonated with me, personally, and just things that stood out, I suppose. But, they both talked about, this idea of change, and I think it was Mr. Pfohl who said, the only thing you can depend upon is change. It's going to happen. And I guess I was thinking of putting myself in their shoes and what that must have been like when they made the decision to take a business that had 50 years plus of time and effort and energy and blood, sweat, and tears and everything that goes into that, and then you recognize that things aren't going to grow there the way that you would like, and we need to find another way to do things in a different place, in a different home. That's such a monumentally tough decision, I would think, on some levels. And I don't think I asked Mr. Pfohl about that. I'd be curious, but that takes a lot of guts, I'd say, to pick up where you are with that kind of history and those kind of roots and going to North Carolina. Just the idea of embracing change, that's a big change. And one of the other stories that I love that Mr. Pfohl talked about was just identifying North Carolina as a growth market, because New York had kind of, had a great growth period coming out of World War II. We heard about Buffalo and, how that was really taking off. A lot of industry there that, was supported by the need for roads and bridges and housing. And, that helped to fuel a lot of demand for materials that Sunrock was putting out. But Mr. Pfohl had shared how he identified the Raleigh market through a Rand McNally publication. I think it was called Places Rated. And he went to the library, essentially, or it's a library book at the time. And I think about now, if you're looking at growth markets, you could probably just go into Google and say, what are the most bustling cities in America? If you're looking to resettle or grow in a new market, that's essentially the market research you would do here in 2024. In 1980, 1982, when Mr. Pfohl was probably going about this exercise, this Rand McNally book was talking about the Raleigh-Durham market that was not what it was today. It wasn't the technology hub that it is here in 2024, and that's probably one of the fastest growing markets. And I think I did ask Mr. Pfohl if he thought it would ultimately become what it is here today. And I think he stopped short of basically saying that he envisioned this, or I think Zach probably did too, because I don't think anybody thought of the research triangle and that becoming, what it was here and the meaningful impact it's had, in that market and helping to drive that market, making it meaningful, not just here, but around the world. What a decision that was to go there. And, he talked to, I don't think it was a Rand McNally decision, based on that source, but, the idea of going to Canada. He talked about Toronto as the second largest city in North America. And, we're in Cleveland. We're 4 hours from Toronto, and I don't even think about that. He mentioned that a lot of people don't know that, but I think in my head, 4.5 million people live in the metro area in Toronto. Maybe it's more than that. I don't know, but it's a major market, and he's identified that. Again, identifying geography and population as kind of drivers of where materials need to be. Where the people are, that's where the materials got to go at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think you hit on what Mr. Pfohl hit on, and sort of saying, the only constant is change, and obviously that's something we've heard a lot, and it's something we kind of even talked a little bit about in our last episode when talking with everything the industry's faced this year, faced over the last several years, but still come out on top. And that's how you get to these places like the Sunrocks, like the Lux Stones. You get thrown a curveball and you adapt, and you figure out what it's going to take to survive or even thrive in an altered environment, in a totally new environment, going from North Carolina or going from New York to North Carolina, expanding into Canada. It's taking what you have in front of you and saying, this may not be perfect. This is our situation. How do we make the most of it? And moving forward and trusting your gut and knowing there's going to be some missteps. There might be some failures, but we know our mission. We know what we want to do. We got to keep going. And, if we don't adapt, we're going to die. And ultimately they adapted, and they're here now 3/4 of a century later.
Yeah, they have a great story. I love stories like that. Family-owned companies. We talk about the American dream offline, just how that is kind of embodies, their path, their pursuit. His father and his uncles basically, post-World War II decided to go about starting a business and growing something. Working for something. So many stories like that across our industry, Jack, and Sunrock is just one of them. And again, it's a great story, and we appreciate Mr. Pfohl and Zach Satterwhite sitting down with me and relaying some of their perspective to Pit and Quarry. Well, what else is happening at Pit and Quarry? Well, if you missed our last episode, that would be episode 29. We talked about the state of the aggregates industry. We had 5 guests on the show, all equipment manufacturers kind of relaying their insights. So we'd encourage you to jump back on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever it is you're listening or watching us, and check out episode 29 on the state of the aggregates industry. It's a good state of affairs for construction materials out there. And lastly, I wanted to put another house ad out there for any producers wanting to attend the Pit and Quarry Roundtable and Conference. We're going to be in Phoenix, January 30 and 31. There's still time to apply to attend. That's pitandquarryroundtable.com if you want more information, you want to learn about the event, if you want to hear from Jack or I on it. We're there every year, obviously, and feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get you some more details about that. But again, I want to thank the good folks at Sunrock for visiting with us today, and Jack, just want to thank Geologic as well. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you
for being here with me. But thanks to Geologic for supporting us and being able to bring this content to life for everybody.
Yeah, thanks as always, Geologic. We'll see everyone next time.
Happy holidays, everybody.
See you.